Welcome to Things You Don't Know. Today, a topic that people know little bits about, but they don't know some of the quiet details. And thank goodness we have our resident historian who will absolutely make sure that we are on track with all of this and get you the right information. Starting off here, when you think about dictators failing in World War II, what people usually think about is they think about Berlin in ruins or a bunker in flames. But Italy's story is just a whole lot stranger, isn't it, Chandler?
Yes, it is, Dr. Weaver. There's no firing squad, no mass uprising, just a meeting, a vote, and a king quietly changing the locks.
Tonight on Things You Don't Know, how Benito Mussolini, the first fascist dictator of Europe, was overthrown at least the first time in July 1943, not by revolutionaries, but by his own system collapsing under military, economic, and moral failure.
Now, when you say that he was overthrown more than once,
Yes, that's an interesting story we'll get into in a few minutes. But this
okay,
is this is the first time that cost him the leadership of most of Italy.
all right.
At the core of fascism and the myth of El Duce, Mussolini sold Italy a dream, modernity, the chance to restore the Roman Empire in the 20th century, organized discipline, the corporate state making the best of both socialism and capitalism, black shirts, marching columns, basically Roman glory with modern technology and better tailoring.
It is really interesting the way that happened and the way also, and I don't know if you plan on getting into this a little bit later, Dr. Deneen, or not, but he vacillated. As I was mentioning to you a little earlier, that it seems to me that if Italy had stayed on one side or the other throughout World War II and leading up to it, that the war would have been shorter. Don't you agree?
I think you're quite right. I mean, Spain and Portugal were fascist or semi-fascist, and they had the sense to stay out of the war, and their regime survived till the 70s.
Yes, it did. And Italy was just like, Germany to the Allies, to Germany to the Allies, with no definite stance, which therefore made things more complicated and complex, I think.
Yes, I think so too. Fascism in Italy was always at least part theater, almost operatically so. The trains sometimes ran on time. The speeches were loud. The institution underneath, very fragile.
And Mussolini, well, he made a very fatal mistake. He believed his own propaganda. He actually thought that Italy was a great power. Now, Dr. Weaver, I would like to turn our attention now to the North African Empire, the empire that wasn't.
Yeah, yeah, let's go ahead and get started in North Africa here. Mussolini wanted an Italian Mediterranean, Mare Nostrum. Instead, Italian forces in Libya ran into British armor, armored tanks, etc., and logistics that they couldn't begin to match.
The Italian troops were very brave, but they were under-equipped and very badly supplied. Artillery without shells, tanks without fuel, leadership chosen for loyalty instead of competence. Australian General Alexander said they were trying to fight a 19th century war in the 1940s.
Germany had to bail Italy out, sending Erwin Rommel and the Afrika Korps. That helped keep Italy in the fight and exposed exactly how weak Mussolini's empire really was.
By late 1942 and early 1943, North Africa was gone. Hundreds of thousands of Axis troops surrendered in Tunisia. Italy lost men, they lost prestige, and most important, perhaps, they lost confidence.
Now, that's a very sad thing to lose confidence like that, especially in a situation like this. Now, let's talk about Greece, where everything just goes wrong. Mussolini invaded Greece in 1940, and he didn't even tell Hitler about it.
It seems to me that between, and correct me here if I'm a little off base, Dr. Deneen, but Greece and Italy have always kind of had a problem, haven't they?
They have. That goes back to the Greek city-states and the Roman Empire. That was supposed to be a quick victory for the fascists. It's very much like what Putin's had to deal with in the Ukraine. Instead, Italian forces were pushed back into the backwater of their empire, an Eastern European country called Albania they'd taken over in the 30s. Winter set in, very similar to what happens with the Nazis in Russia. The supply lines collapse and morale craters.
Yeah, yeah. Hitler had to intervene again, diverting German forces to the Balkans in 1941. That delay mattered later when Germany turned east toward Moscow.
And inside Italy, elites were taking notes. Mussolini wasn't just losing wars, he was dragging Germany right down with him. Italy's mistakes were just beginning. And here's another failure that people tend to miss. The Axis never meaningfully inserted pro Axis Indian forces into combat in the West under Subhas Chandra Bose. They talked revolution, courted symbolism, and struck deals. But when it was time to commit those forces decisively, the Axis hesitated, fractured, and squandered the moment. If you want the full messy story on this, see our political deals with the devil episode. And I just have to say, in a situation like this, it can be very harmful and very painful when you have a deal worked out and you go and then somebody reneges. That can lead to all kinds of unfortunate events.
You're absolutely right, Chandler. All three Axis powers did not make use of Bose and his men. He was anti-British without being anti-Semitic, and the Japanese, the Nazis, and Mussolini's Italy filled him with a lot of hot air but refused to use them. But perhaps the biggest failure on the Italian front happens as a result of an event in Germany in early 1943. We all know about the Valkyrie plot against Hitler. There were actually 32 different plots. And this particular attempt was Marshal Henning von Trescow's efforts to arrest Hitler and put him in an insane asylum during his visit to the Ukrainian front. Had the Fuhrer fallen, remember the Holocaust has just started only about 6 months earlier. It's terrible, but we haven't lost 6 million people yet. Some in the Italian elite, particularly those around Count Ciano, Mussolini's son-in-law, thought Italy could negotiate a compromise peace and an alliance with the West against the Soviet Union. See the films Valkyrie and Darkest Hour for more details on that. But everything changes on the home front in July 1943 with what we call Operation Husky.
Yeah. And to be true, that is our name for it. uh, the Allies' name for it.
Yeah.
Allied troops land in Sicily, American, British, Canadian. And this time, Italians aren't fighting on distant fronts. Bombs are falling on Italian cities.
Boom. And the Italian army collapses quite fast. Units surrender. Civilians blame Mussolini. The illusion of fascist strength evaporates in just a matter of weeks.
The success that happens in Italy is a result of an alliance between the American and British militaries. We mentioned the Canadians. There are a lot of African forces there, and there's also troops led by Lucky Luciano in the American organized crime. He's let out of prison to spearhead the attacks against Mussolini and take Sicily back for the mafia. So there's a key thing in this whole process that people miss. Mussolini's fall wasn't driven by protests in the street. It was driven by insiders, economists, generals, aristocrats, bureaucrats, the Catholic Church, and above all, the king.
On July 24th and 25th, 1943, the Fascist Grand Council meets. For the first time, they vote against Mussolini.
The vote doesn't remove him directly, but it gives King Victor Emmanuel III the excuse he's been waiting for since Mussolini took absolute power 15 years earlier.
Can you just say something, Dr. Deneen? You've mentioned the king. He was the king of Italy.
Yes, and he had agreed to make Mussolini prime minister in 1922 and allow him to assume absolute power 6 years later out of a fear of communism and industrial uprisings. But he saw the prestige and the purpose of the monarchy, the church, business, and so on, all suffering under this man's wild dreams of a new Roman Empire. So he's been wanting to do something for a while, and the vote of this council gives him the excuse to act.
You know, another thing that just pops into my head here, Chandler. Here you have a country, and in the middle of it, you have Rome, where the Catholic Church is,
Yeah.
and I just wonder how they managed to work that in a governmental fashion. Do you have some ideas on that, Dr. Deneen?
Yeah, I've often wondered that myself.
The, Mussolini's claim to fame, besides his idea for an empire, is he settled the issue with the Catholic Church very briefly when Italy was unified in the 1870s. Garibaldi and some of those leaders took over what had been the papal states because the church ruled half of Italy for almost 1,000 years. And the popes had said they were prisoners in the Vatican and would not negotiate. But Mussolini makes a deal where the church is given an indemnity, rights over education, and in Pius XI's famous statement, we give God back to Italy and Italy back to God. So he's seen as a brilliant strategist, certainly a dictator, but not at the level of Hitler and Stalin. And for his own purposes, he tries to pretend to be a person of faith. So
Still seems to me to be one of the strangest kind of amalgamations in the world.
it is. And there are people in his inner circle that are devout, not only Catholics, but Protestants and even Jews, because Mussolini, unlike Hitler, is not an anti Semite and actually protects Jewish people from going to the gas chambers, very similar to the way the Finns did.
And I think that, say what you want to about Mussolini, Dr. Deneen, but I think that, I will just say that's one thing that is to his credit that he did help the Jews. I have to give him that. I do have to give credit where credit is due on that front.
Absolutely. So the king dismisses him, but he doesn't want to put him in prison. He wants to put him in a more or less uh, really luxurious exile in this fancy hotel. So
Okay. Well, let's get back to our storyline here, where we're talking about what we might call the coup without gunfire. So here we are. Mussolini goes to meet the king. He's expecting and anticipating support.
Oh, but he gets a rude awakening. Instead, he's told he's dismissed, he's arrested, and he's driven away in an ambulance so the public won't notice.
no speech, no rally, no heroic last stand. El Duce simply disappears.
Italy doesn't immediately become an allied partner. Germany occupies the north. The war in Italy turns really quite brutal.
Yes, unfortunately, Dr. Weaver, it does. But the spell of fascism is broken. A dictator who claimed to embody the nation is revealed as replaceable.
It's interesting, too. We talk about fascism, and sometimes we need to uh, differentiate between authoritarianism and fascism. It's a rather interesting thing because in Hitler, we had an authoritarian megalomaniac, and in Mussolini, we had fascism.
The term actually comes from an axe and stake tied together as a symbol of authority in the name in the days of the Roman Empire. That's a fasci. It means blessed stick.
Ah, okay.
Oh,
So Mussolini fails because his wars fail in North Africa, in Greece, and in Sicily. Fascism promised strength. The economy had collapsed, so all it delivers is defeat and humiliation.
And that is the lesson. Dictators don't usually fall when they lose control of the police, although that does happen sometimes too. They fall when elites lose their faith that the leader can protect them.
absolutely. And what followed here is going to tell us everything. Germany rescuing Mussolini in a daring raid. Paratroopers pulling him off a mountain. But what they created wasn't a revival, it was a puppet. The Italian Social Republic, a regime without legitimacy, a regime without independence, propped up by German guns. Fascism reduced to an echo, 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 ruling only because Berlin said so. At the end of the war, Mussolini, along with his mistress, was captured, shot, and paraded through the streets before being hanged upside down in a gas station. An inglorious end for a man who wanted to be Caesar.
Now let's talk a little bit about why the elites turned on Mussolini. He loved to pose as a Caesar reborn, columns, eagles, the famous fascist salute with the outstretched arm, that's a Roman salute, the whole Roman imperial drama. But the people who actually lived in Italy's old power structures, the Catholic Church, the nobility, even the fascist party itself, never believed he embodied or was Rome. At best, he was allowed to rent it.
You know, the Catholic Church, especially the Vatican elite, had made its peace with Mussolini through the Lateran Accords. That was a deal, not a marriage. The church tolerated fascism because it restored order, property, and influence. But Mussolini's dream of a neo pagan Roman Empire made churchmen nervous. Bombs falling on Rome in 1943 weren't just military failures, they were theological ones. Rome wasn't supposed to be sacrificed for ideology. When Mussolini could no longer protect the city, the faithful, or the church institutional survival, the calculation changed. The church doesn't topple regimes with tanks, but it withdraws moral oxygen. And in Italy, that silence spoke volumes.
Yes, it really did, Dr. Weaver. And as far as Italy's aristocracy, it had survived emperors, popes, kings, and parliament. Their loyalty was never to fascism, it was to continuity. Mussolini promised grandeur. What he delivered was rationing, bombing raids, and German soldiers acting like occupiers. By 1943, noble families saw the writing on the wall. If Mussolini stayed, Italy would be ground to dust between Berlin and the Allies. Backing the king against the Duce wasn't betrayal, it was simply self-preservation. Old elites don't die for revolutions. No, they outlast them. Let's talk about believers versus the survivors. Here's the quiet irony of the whole thing. Mussolini was undone by fascists. Think about that. He was undone by his own type of people. That's irony. By 1943, the fascist Grand Council had split into two camps. True believers who still believed in empire, and careerists who realized the war was lost. Once North Africa collapsed, Greece embarrassed them, and Sicily fell. The spell broke. Fascism had promised strength. It had produced dependence on Germany. The vote against Mussolini wasn't moral courage, it was institutional triage.
Yeah, the core truth here, Mussolini failed not because he aimed too high, but because he misunderstood Rome.
And yes, he did understand. What he misunderstood is that Rome isn't an empire that you declare, it is simply a system that survives by absorbing shocks.
When Mussolini demanded loyalty instead of stability, every old Roman instinct kicked in. The church chose eternity, the nobility chose survival, the party chose to save itself. That's the final brutal irony. The man who wanted to resurrect Rome was overthrown by people he had dismissed who understood it far better than he ever did. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. We have a lot of wonderful things coming up. Come back soon.
Yes, thank you for listening to Things You Don't Know, and be sure to come back and join us next time. Bye for now, folks.
All righty. Thanks for tuning in and keep your eye out for history. Remember, it repeats all the time. Come on back and see us sometime right soon. Bye for now.